So Apple has released a new M3 MacBook Air, and they did this kind of quietly through a press release rather than waiting for an event, which leads to a few questions. Firstly, will there be a spring event? Let's talk about that in a moment. And what's different about the M3 MacBook Air compared to the M2? Are you going to want to upgrade if you've already got an M2 MacBook Air? What about if you've got an M1 MacBook Air? Let's take a quick look. Starting with the differences on this model, and there really aren't many differences. It still comes in the same 13-inch and 15-inch sizes with the same colorways, the same screen, same keyboard. It is basically the same laptop. Even has the same battery life compared to the M2 model. Obviously, you are getting the M3 chip, which is slightly faster than M2, but it's a bit like saying one F1 car is faster than another F1 car. Most people are never going to be able to push the boundaries of these chips. They're so capable. One key difference, of course, is that the GPU now supports ray tracing. If you've got some software that supports ray tracing, that might be important to you. There are a couple of other differences with the M2 MacBook Air. Apple is now claiming support for up to 2 external displays. As you probably know, the M2 MacBook Air only supports 1 external display. However, there is a caveat to this, and that is that with the M3 MacBook Air, to support 2 external displays, you've got to shut the laptop. So you can't use the internal display, and therefore you'll also need a keyboard and mouse or trackpad. So this is great if you're going to be docking your MacBook Air on a desk with 2 large screens, but otherwise it's not really any different. There is also support for Wi-Fi 6E, so that means greater network throughput if you've got network gear that supports Wi-Fi 6E, of course. But it's a nice thing to have. Other than that, there really aren't any major differences. So you can sort of see why Apple would have just done a simple press release announcement rather than wait for an event for this. It is a fairly minor upgrade, if you like. There is one other difference with the M3 compared to the M2. If I recall correctly, it's got a decoder and encoder for AV1 video codecs. And if that means anything to you, then you'll know if you want an M3 over an M2. Although, if you're serious about video editing, you're probably going to go for an M3 Pro or an M3 Max chip rather than the standard M3. So let's just compare the different pricing SKUs so that we can see what's available. And I've got the US site up here on the left-hand side, and I've got the UK site on the right-hand side. And you see that the pricing is identical in pounds and dollars. Of course, the British pounds price includes our 20% sales tax, whereas the US price doesn't include sales tax as far as I'm aware. And that will depend on which state you're in. So starting with the entry-level model, we get a binned chip. So we lose 2 of those GPU cores. And we're still stuck with the same paltry 8 gigabytes of RAM and 256 gigs of storage. I think in 2024, this is getting more and more of a meme. Apple really needs to address this. Now, I didn't expect them to do that with the M3 models because we've already seen the M3 MacBook Pro, which comes with the same 8 gigs of RAM as standard. But for the M4 models, I do think Apple needs to step this up to 16 gigs as standard and a 512 SSD. You will notice something interesting though. On this page here of 13-inch laptops, notice the SKU on the right-hand side at $1,500 or £1,500 actually comes with 16 gigs of RAM. Now, if I recall correctly, previously with the MacBook Air, if you wanted 16 gigs of RAM, that was a custom order item. Whereas now, if there's a dedicated SKU for it, does this mean that you can go into the Apple Store and get a 16 gig MacBook Air off the shelf? If so, that's a really good move. And at $1,500 or £1,500, yes, it's not the cheapest laptop in the world, but I don't think there's much else that's going to touch it in terms of all-round value and performance. The MacBook Air continues to be excellent value for money in a general purpose computing machine. Now just notice, if you want a 13-inch MacBook Air, there's also the M2 chip model available. And this now starts at $1,000 or £1,000. Again, that's the binned chip, but for £200 more, you can have the 10-core GPU. Again, if you want more than 8 gigs of RAM, that's going to be a custom order item. But what's good about this is that you're going to start to see the M2 MacBook Air appearing on places like Amazon for even less than $1,000. It also means that Apple is no longer selling the M1 MacBook Air officially, but I'm going to bet that they've got a huge stockpile of those things which will now be finding their way out to resellers. So you're going to be able to get the M1 MacBook Air probably for under £800, $800. In fact, I've already seen it that cheap on Amazon at various times. So grab one of those and you've got an absolute bargain, because the M1 MacBook Air still in 2024 is a great machine. Let's now step up to the 15-inch model. There's no binned chips on these models. They're all the 8-core CPU and 10-core GPU. And again, we've got the same choices: 8 gigs of RAM and 256 storage, 8 gigs and 512 storage, or 16 gigs and 512 storage for $1,700 or £1,700. Now, of course, with all of the MacBook Airs, there is still the custom order option. So if I just select this top model here for a moment, and it doesn't matter whether you go 13-inch or 15-inch, you get the same options. So you can go up to 24 gigs of unified memory if you want to, and there are options for 1 terabyte and 2 terabytes of SSD storage. As always, you've got to select the specification you want at the time you order it, because none of these components is upgradable afterwards. You do also get the choice of power adapters, so you can have a 35-watt dual USB-C power adapter, or you can have a 70-watt power adapter. The 70-watt power adapter will charge the MacBook Air faster. Of course, with the dual port, you get the option to charge your iPad or your iPhone at the same time. Is it worth upgrading? If you've already got the M2 MacBook Air, you're not really getting much more for your money. If you desperately need ray tracing support or the AV1 encoder or that dual display or Wi-Fi 6E, then yeah, maybe. When it comes to the performance differences though, I would expect that most people would never see the difference in normal use. So if you've already got an M2 MacBook Air, you shouldn't feel the need to rush out and upgrade. What about if you've got an M1 MacBook Air? Well, the M3 chip is a good deal faster. It's got newer video encoders, so if you're doing a bit of light video editing, that might make a difference for you. The GPU is significantly stronger as well. So yeah, possibly it is worth an upgrade if you're on an M1 MacBook Air. You will perhaps see some difference. Of course, the biggest difference that you'll see is the change to the chassis. So if you desperately want that, then it may be worth having a look. But let's be clear, the M1 MacBook Air is a very capable machine, and I imagine a lot of people won't see a huge difference from the upgrade. What about if you're on an Intel MacBook Air? Well, then an upgrade is well worth it, because it'll be like night and day. Apple are actually claiming that the M3 chip is up to 13 times faster than the fastest Intel-based MacBook Air. And that's just CPU. The graphics performance, again, there's no comparison at all. The M3 MacBook Air is way more capable than any Intel MacBook Air, to the point where you can actually do some decent gaming on an M3. So what about the event? I mean, we were expecting a spring event because Apple usually does one, and we were expecting the M3 MacBook Air to be announced at that event. So the fact that Apple's done this press release does question, is there still going to be an event? I think there probably will be, because Apple will want to update its iPad lineup, and perhaps that will be the focus of the event. And I kind of understand why they might have just gone for a press release with this, because it's not a big step up. If they'd have made a fanfare about it at an event, they'd have probably been ridiculed for that. But the M3 MacBook Air is a welcome addition to the lineup. We're looking forward, of course, to seeing the M3 chip in other places, and the M3 Ultra later this year as well. I suspect that might come at WWDC. And the event for the iPads, well, that's going to be interesting too, because there's a lot of talk about the iPad Pros getting an OLED screen and having a much thinner chassis along with the M3 chip. So that'll be interesting to see whether Apple does that. Anyway, we'll bring some content on that to the channel if and when it does happen. Thanks as always for your kind support of the channel. You can support us by using our affiliate links in the description. It doesn't cost you anything extra, but the channel earns a small commission if you do use those. Thanks as always for your subscriptions and for giving us a thumbs up or a thumbs down. Look forward to reading your comments, and see you again soon for some more geekery.